You've got Fathom going, so
Yeah.
that's working. So that's going to record it either way.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, we are recording. So Stephen Oliver here again. Good to be back. I am with H.Adam Holt. Adam, let's start with giving you everybody a background. How did you get to the point that you're at, and let's explain to them what you're doing now and how you're impacting financial advisors around the world.
Yeah, sure. No, thanks for having me. It's what fun to hear also about your whole martial arts background. That's really exciting. Of a aficionado myself, not certainly to your degree, but I think the story about myself and Asset+Map, I think like most financial advisors, I call myself a recovering financial planner today. I'm a CFP, built a practice in Philadelphia with 3 or 4 other gentlemen, got to 25 people, about $1.2 billion of AUM. Still did pretty heavy on the estate planning and the corporate side. We typically positioned ourselves as financial advocates for many years, as some people know. And early in my career, I found that the complexity of the households that I was dealing with really necessitated for me to create a visual experience that would help them understand their entire financial inventory on one page, right? In the early days, when you're dealing with complex clients, they got a lot of stuff. They got businesses, real estate, trusts. They got split interest in private equity deals. They got money they put within 1 generation, 3 generations. And so it gets really complicated to keep it all together. As far as you're meeting multiple households, you got to try to keep this in your head. It doesn't work. So I created this concept called Asset+Map, used it in my own practice, got a compliance approved at my broker dealer, and then tripled my revenue 3 years in a row. And people started saying, what's this kid doing? So I was in my 30s at the time. Now I'm pushing 50. So you can kind of give you a feel for space. That process became scaled, started getting adopted by other advisors when I showed it at a top producer conference. And next thing you know, we've got thousands of advisors using Asset+Map. So it's interesting to see, today I spend my life as a CEO of a FinTech company, over 40 employees, serving over 1 million people, which is pretty amazing globally, basically to map their entire financial life and get some financial diagnosis. So that's what I'm doing.
There you go. There you go. Well, that was in a nutshell there. The
just like that.
If you look at the financial advisors that you've worked with, both obviously you have a lot of followers of the podcast. You have people who have your software installed, but where do you see the biggest opportunities for growth among those people?
Amongst our own financial advisors?
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of pressure right now, Stephen, on financial advisors to deliver more value. And that's not new, right? I mean, every customer is expecting you to get more, but I think financial advisors, and I'll say this for myself, we got we'll call it comfortable delivering the same experience every year. We delivered our annual report. We talked about performance is better. We did financial planning. We ran the analysis. Looks like you're still good. People with a lot of capital tend to be consistently okay at most things. And so there's not a lot of anxiety there. It tends to be that I think that when there's a new concept, a new sales strategy, a new product, then it tends to get to customers. But I think that that's changing, and it has been changing for many years in the higher net worth space. What I think is really critical, Stephen, is advisors need to show value to their customers without being asked. In other words, I did this for you. I'm looking out for your best interest, even though we don't have a scheduled meeting. And I think we have an opportunity to be proactive. Reach out to existing customers, say, hey, you know what? I thought about this strategy, or I want to bring in an attorney, or I think it's time to talk to this accountant, or I want to bring in the family for a family meeting, and being proactive in their financial advocacy is really important. So the question is, how are they going to do that, and how are they going to scale it?
Yeah. To me, that seems to be an extremely important point. I saw research recently that I'm going to butcher the numbers, but something in the range of 65% of clients of financial advisors weren't particularly thrilled with the person they're working with.
That is so true.
Yeah. And the year-over-year turnover tends to be pretty low in the industry. But if the clients just aren't thrilled with working with you, and the same study showed, I think 35% of clients were thinking actively about leaving. Now, if you look at the real numbers, it's not nearly that high. But, if your clients just aren't that impressed, you're certainly not getting the rest of the family. You're not getting all of the assets. You're not getting, expansion in the relationship. But there's so many other opportunities to build a deeper bond, to build a deeper relationship. And give some examples of that, of ways that you've seen the advisors do a really good job. I think that proactively reaching out is certainly an important component.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because for the most part, financial advisors and why I think customers don't really leave in droves. I mean, most of the community of this podcast is top producers, right? You've achieved something, you figured something out. You probably have great relationship, or you have great performance, or you have unbelievable service.
Mhm.
It's very seldom that a financial advisor has more than one, maybe two of those things. Very, very seldom.
Yeah.
But they tend to be amazing sticking points, right? If I've got great relationship, my client's never going to leave me. They trust me. They don't want to jump out of this pot into the fire and then try to figure out how they're going to trust someone else. It's kind of like, you know what you got. And for many people, that means the consumers that are hiring us, the investors that are hiring us, if it's investment management, they don't really have to have a lot of high maintenance around the investment management. They're like, your job is to do better than I would do on my own. And I already value that. That's worth 1% right now. Okay. Cause I'll just mess it up.
Yeah.
Or I'll just go put it all on Amazon and hopefully it works out.
Or to have somebody I trust who's doing it,
The
that I
trust
don't
is a
have
big
to
one.
pay attention. Yeah.
You know, the reality about financial decisions is that unless you have confidence, you do nothing, right? But the challenge with our business is that unfortunately it's complicated and there's a high cost of being wrong. So most people are like, well, I don't want to mess this up, so I'll do nothing, right? That's a decision.
Yeah.
And I think what we can do as financial professionals is we can give them ways to get more confident around financial decisions. Now, we've used financial planning output for years. Hey, see, you should feel confident. You can afford this burn down rate. You can afford this spend, this product, this house, this boat, whatever it is. You will be able to fund education or not, and tell them what they need to do in order to fund that. But that's kind of been the limit to way I think that a lot of advisors have given proactive advice. One of the things that we found at Asset+Map is there's a couple things actually that's kind of interesting recently. We found that by giving clients unsolicited a copy of their asset map, which is a household visualization of all the people and entities that matter to you, your assets, your liabilities, your insurance policies, and your cash flows, all organized, basically coordinated by the person who receives it. And we give that with your brand to them just because. Listen, I took the liberty, Stephen, I created this visualization for your household just to simplify it. I know you don't read my 80-page report. I know you're not looking at your statements. I know you're not logging into my portal that I spent a fortune to build for you. But I just created this for you. Go put it on your fridge or put it with your wills and trust. It's a treasure map. And it's unbelievable how a low-tech tool like that creates massive utility, not just with the client who tends to be engaged, but with the partner or spouse who's disengaged.
You bet.
And they have no affinity to you. They have no relationship with you. They don't know why you're great. And as soon as that person passes away, they're going to be ripe for leaving you.
Yeah.
And so the key is, how do you engage them and then help them understand what that means? And that's where I think we're seeing this. We also rolled out something called Signals, gives them kind of red light, green light, kind of like air pressure in your tire. You need to know when that's low. And I think for certain events that a lot of advisors haven't talked about, like long-term care or disability planning or living too long, we need to give them feedback. So that's we're basically creating tear sheets that are contextual to the client. Send that to them unsolicited and say, hey, I was thinking about you. What do you think about this?
No, that's great. That's great. And a component there that I've mentioned a lot with my clients is getting everyone involved, not just, if it's a husband-wife team and the husband is handling everything, you've got, a very weak relationship long-term there.
Yeah.
And second, third generational planning as well, is all of those tools for building relationship, for building rapport, for making sure that the spouse or the other person involved in all of it is engaged, likes you to, respects you, and sees what the value is. That's priceless. I mean, it's absolutely priceless.
Very smart comment. And I think that very often as advisors, we take that for granted, right? And there's very few opportunities for us to step back and say, wait a minute, am I literally delivering empathetically to my customers? Am I asking actually what my customers want? Not just the one who calls, who answers the phone and sends me the emails, but the other ones. Yeah. And I would even argue to you that or debate perhaps that we need to do a better job as an industry of bringing in the next generation, right? I mentioned this family meetings. Nothing stops us from saying, hey, you know what? Once every 5 years, we're going to put a full family meeting. We're going to let your next generation know, as much as you're willing to tell them, where everything is and why we're relevant and what we can do and what we've already put in place to protect them from the inevitable future. And that's what you've done. And I think that we have an opportunity to gain preeminence with next generations, because I'm assuming most of our clients are in that X to boomer generation or greatest generation that have the capital that's now going to transfer. So I think that there's an enormous opportunity to engage the under-engaged or underserved, depending on what you call it, by delivering value.
You bet. You bet. You know, and it's such an easy message to get across. I mean, what do you know now that if you knew 20 years ago, 30
Hmm.
years ago, 40 years ago, you would have been better served? You know, wouldn't you like to see your children and grandchildren get a leg up on that
Yeah,
process?
that's true.
Um, you know, what regrets do you have that you didn't have somebody looking over your shoulder and helping you out with these things earlier on? And I think my daughter just graduated from college
Oh,
last
congrats.
weekend, and thank you.
Hmm.
And and I'm definitely in that point of, she's not thinking about retirement planning, but there's so many things that
Yeah.
I would like her to know about what comes next and how it unfolds, and how the finances work and so forth. So it's such an easy message to a parent. And again, most advisors are not even thinking about it. If they are, they're doing a mediocre job of communicating that well and getting everybody involved.
You wonder why that is, though, because this is, I mean, this is all logic, right? You and I are
Yeah.
not coming up with, rocket science here.
No, no.
Eventually, our clients will pass or get into an incapacitated state.
Mhm.
And I think the challenge is that most of the advisors don't think they're going to be around. It's not
Right.
going to matter. It's the next generation of my succession plans problem. I'll have already monetized or exited, or it's not happening in enough frequency in the actual practice for for advisors to start saying, you know what, I need a plan here. One of the things that we did at our firm many years ago is we made sure that there was someone that represented every single generation by decade in our firm.
Mhm.
So we have advisors that are 70, 60, 50, 40, and 30 years old. Now, they all have different attitudes as to their longevity in the practice. And of course, we did it as a defensive play so that we had succession, God forbid, man was down.
You bet.
But the reality is that this is also building in a long-term succession plan for taking over the practices and keeping that relationship value. And that's not an easy thing to do because it's a question that people coming into the business are a different breed. I think they want a different thing out of the business
Mhm.
than we wanted if you started in the kind of eat what you kill market.
Right.
But I think there's definitely ways to create connectivity. And one of the things that I just recently had, we had interviewed somebody in our podcast, Rethink Financial Advice, that talked about how he made sure that he had a female in every single meeting, not just because he wanted to create diversity, but because he wanted to have an empathetic view, somebody who was thinking completely differently than the typical dominant, males in the room,
Mhm.
and who would also connect with a female if that person was in the room as well.
Yeah.
What it brought up for me is the importance of being aware of people's real needs. Because I think sometimes we tend to just rinse and repeat and don't necessarily take the time to say, what do you need as a customer? What really motivates you? And how do
Yeah.
I deliver on that? Whether it's multi-generational or it's putting meaning behind money or investing alongside values.
Mhm.
And I think we've just basically done this, we've figured out a way to scale advice and build a business. I
Yeah.
think we're going to need to definitely do more personalization.
Yeah. That point that you make, I think shouldn't be glossed over is, something we mentioned, my background in martial arts.
Mm.
And one of the things I learned early on, and I mean, all the way back in my 20s, I had a big operation, and, I tapped out at about 50 staff members. But the thing that I learned early on is almost every martial arts school was run by adult male athlete, oftentimes 30s to 40s, and most of the staff were in their 20s. And in the kids market, 80% of the decision making is made by mom.
That's right.
And what happened is that all of the details that mom was aware of, that mom was concerned about, the average owner and the average staff member was totally oblivious to.
Right.
And early on, I realized, and I think it may have been, early on, I lost a $25,000 renewal because there wasn't toilet paper in the bathroom and the bathrooms weren't clean, as is just a silly example.
Yeah.
But what I learned early on is all of my marketing, all of my messaging, and the introductory sales process, the retention, really was all focused at mom. In this case, mom made the decision, dad held veto power. So I had to have dad in the loop, but it was mom making the decision. And I believe on the finances side, people miss that worldview as well. I hear at the high levels in financial planning is women focusing on bringing in women, all of this different niching and diversity conversations. But what it seems to miss is that whether it's a married couple
Mhm.
an adult male. The car companies learned this the hard way years ago. You had a bunch of 70-year-old males out of Detroit running the marketing for a product that was 70% of the decision making was made by a female.
Yep.
And the industry seems to be going at it from my standpoint, from a marketing standpoint, a little bit ass backwards, is
Mm.
rather than fully getting the both people in the household engaged. And I've seen a lot of data now that women don't necessarily respond better to women. So it's not that female advisors have to go after females. In fact, female advisors, if they're perceived as competent, do just as well, if not better, with men
Yeah.
as male advisors do. But it's getting everybody involved, being aware of where the decision is really being made, being
Yeah.
aware of where the long-term relationship is, and being aware of really who the decision maker is and who the driver of the conversation is.
That's super. I mean, you're right on point. And I think it's interesting because we tend to catalog this marketplace of financial clients that want financial advice, right? You have the do it for me, right? They're
Mhm.
going to hire a financial professional. You have on this side the DIY,
Yeah.
all right, do it myself. Then I'm not going to talk to an advisor. Then you have these people in the middle that do it with me when I want you, occasionally, episodically. Like a
Mhm.
kid's going to college, now I need to talk to somebody, but then don't talk to me.
Right.
Right. So there's an interesting space. We tend to talk about the do it for me space as always, when we think of that persona, we immediately go to the baby boomer population,
Mhm.
right? 68, 75, two-person household, right? But the rest of the population does not look like that anymore.
No.
And with two wage earners, it's kind of ignorant to say that I'm only going to go after men that work versus women that are making as much, hopefully, as much money as
Yeah.
men and taking care of all these issues. That it's the market's changing, except we keep talking about the same persona, the
Mhm.
boomer, because that's where the money is, right?
Sure. Sure.
I think that the key and the awareness that you brought up is how do we think outside of our box,
Mhm.
right? How do we contemplate other people's needs? It turns out that all of us in financial advice are really entrepreneurs, and we have created a brand. That brand is not just relationship; it's an experience that you're taking people through. What challenge I'm trying to say is I don't know that everybody's actually thought about what their customer experience looks like from the customer experience.
You bet.
The reality is that we get this false validation that people must be happy because they stay with me for 10 years and they get all their needs met, obviously, and so forth. No, the reality is that
Yeah.
they're not educated enough because you're not educating them as to what they should be asking. And
Yeah.
number two, they're scared to leave you because if they leave you, they're going to be jumping into the fire and they don't know, say, just stick it out. It's sub pop and all. But I think the advisors don't even realize that. They're just
Yeah.
keep delivering these 90-page reports and saying like, see, they love my 1% fee. That's nonsense.
No. No. And oftentimes the people just aren't that impressed generally, but they don't know any better.
They
And
don't
they
know any
just
better.
kind of expect that that's what, the industry is.
Yeah.
And it's, you're much better off to have a delighted client who with unexpected, and even if it's unexpected gifting, they got cookies on their birthday or something like that.
Right.
But you want to have clients that are delighted for any number of reasons, whether it be referrals, retention, expanding the depth and range of what you're doing for them, multi-generational. There's so many points of value there. And it shocks me at how little that advisors tend to be willing to spend and how little effort they're willing to put in to just communicate with their clients.
It's so true. That's in similar surveys that you quoted. I think it just came out from Fidelity or Vanguard. I can't remember now. That said, number one, again, 10 years later, same thing. Number one reason why a client leaves an advisor: communication or lack thereof.
Yeah.
And I think that there's definitely a shift that's coming, and I want everybody to pay attention to this, because if you're not aware of this and you plan on being business in the next 5 years, you're gonna say, "Oh, remember that thing that's Stephen had Adam on there? What they talked about it? Here's what it is." Customer expectations are going through the roof. Margins are compressing. Sorry. Tech is coming right into your business and is going to disintermediate and do what you do at scale for a third of the price, by the way.
Yeah.
Just, in
Yeah.
fact, I know many companies right now that are building and or delivering a product right now that's going to beat you on price.
Mhm.
We're not going to compete on price. We're going to compete on relationship and communication. Advocacy is really the next phase. We just now have to prove it more than ever. So the question is, what are you doing for me lately? right? The cost of switching is going to be really easy in the future, right?
Yeah.
Most of these custodians are enabling, ACAT transfers back and forth with each other. I don't think loyalty is going to win the day.
No.
Loyalty to customer experience is going to be massive. So if you can deliver an unbelievable customer experience, looks like you're looking out for your clients and they know it, and they're going to tell all their friends. And I think what you're going to see is this compression of the entire space as a lot of individuals retire from financial advice, don't want to compete at that level. It's going to leave a smaller population to really, again, be a skewed bell. And basically the best advisors with process and the right pricing are going to dominate the market, and everybody else is going to basically be hurting. And the question is, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah. Yeah. Going back to the study you quoted, it's always been true that in the word I've heard on this is perceived apathy. Most people leave any business not because of a poor service experience, not because of a better price or one thing or another. It's perceived apathy, and as you referred to it as communication or lack of communication. Same thing is, if I think you're in there in my ballpark and you're paying attention and you're really concerned about me and I like you and I like what you're doing, I'm going to be there forever. And if I, have every belief system that randomly you think about me once a year as it pops up on your calendar, then it's going to be a completely different relationship.
That's true. And I think the insurance folks that have been doing insurance for years, they suffer for this even more because people don't have an annual review that they're expecting to look at their performance.
Yeah.
They might not hear from their insurance agent for 10 years, but yet somehow you're a financial planner or provider. I think that's a miss too. I think there's lots of opportunities to set oneself apart these days. Looking holistic at their life, bringing other resources to their life that has nothing to do with the services you provide, whether it's legal, tax, insurance, investment, real estate, banking, even personal coaching. We're seeing a huge move towards, we'll call them life coaches or financial advocates, where people are now saying, hey, what are you spending your money on? Or they're talking about your attitude or your belief systems, or how does your estate plan match your legacy intent, right? If they're not connected, nobody's asked that questions, then clearly it's not going to play out the way you wanted. So I think you're going to see this kind of differentiation effect from those advisors who could really, really be holistic, not just a cool name. I'm a holistic planner. No, like, let me tell you what holistic means. And that means I'm looking out for your best interest, even though you're not.
Oh, absolutely. The comment you just made, I just had two different conversations with different clients, and I said, well, how many customers do you have? How many clients? And both of them, for whatever reason, it was about 650. And then it was,
okay.
A lot of people. But then the next question is when's the last time you communicated with those 650 people? Well,
top 50 got it probably.
Yeah. There. In one case, there was arguably 450 people who have no idea who their guy is, who maybe have gotten some life statements here and there, have no connection, no loyalty. They haven't been on an email newsletter list. They haven't been getting a physical newsletter. They haven't been getting periodic updates. They haven't been getting somebody reaching out to expand their level of service and one thing or another. Well, if I sold somebody 10 years ago, they're not my client anymore. They're just gone in the ether.
They were a customer.
I made a sale, a transaction. But the first thing I do when I start with an advisor is say, we're going to start from day one, not creating any more of those. From the first interaction, you're going to be communicating with them 5-10 times a month. You're going to be at least they're going to be on an email list. They're going to be on a webinar. They're going to be on a live meeting. They're going to have customer appreciation opportunities. They're going to get a newsletter in the mail, whatever it might be. And we're going to be reaching out and finding additional ways to be of service to them. But you only get to that point by staying top of mind and by staying in front of them and communicating and showing that you really care about their situations. It is amazing how few people really think in those terms, right? They're happy to get the commission and they're on to the next thing.
Well, the interesting thing, and that's really well said. The interesting thing about why is that not happening, right? That seems so pretty much obvious right? Yeah. That's what you should do. You should you should find a way to touch your clients multiple times a year, 17 times based upon whichever research study you talk about. But what I think the problem is? Most financial advisors don't know that they should care about it, right? It's worked. I've done well. I've achieved the level of life style that I like, revenue perhaps. And why do I, that sounds like you just said a lot of work. I got to add a lot of work. I got to scale. I don't understand how I'm going to do that. I can't do that for 450 people. Like I could do that for maybe 20 or 30 or 50, but why am I doing that? What's really in it for me?
Yeah.
And that's the real question that for every advisor you need to answer. What kind of practice are you really building? Are you building a lifestyle practice that's good enough? And you know what? Yeah, forget the efficiency. Just keep running it as long as you want. Good for you. Or are you trying to build a succession exit plan? Or are you trying to build a legacy on your brand? You got to understand what you're trying to do today. But I think if you have any longevity in any of that stuff, you got to deliver more, or don't be surprised when you see compression of margin on your revenue.
Yeah. Well, and if you're looking, whether it's looking to sell the business or you're looking for a succession plan to gradually phase yourself out, the real value in the business is the multi-generational side and the depth of the relationship with the clients.
Right.
And so if I have a high level of depth, if I have an active list, active communication mechanism, and a lot of that communication is, one to many. I mean, your software automates a lot of the systems to give them an easy approach to giving a value added. But a lot of what we'll do is one to many. I mean, it's, write an engaging email every day, write an engaging newsletter once a month, host open Q&A meetings, host topical meetings that people can attend, bring their kids, bring their friends. And that's easy. I mean, if I could do this Zoom meeting, but I could make it available to all of my clients on a particular subject. And now I have a value added. Most of them won't show up. Some of them will. It's one more level of touch. It's the value I see for a lot of advisors of something like a podcast is they get their clients engaged and listening to the podcast and involved with following them. And then they really feel like they have a deeper relationship when the advisor is spending an hour a week creating it, but then they're impacting 20% of the clients or 30% of their clients every month by them being engaged with it.
Well, I'll add on to that, because what you're talking about is scaling your brand, scaling your message, providing educational and hopefully topical content. I think podcasting, by the way, is fantastic. Obviously, I'm a big fan of it. You don't have a microphone like this if you're just doing Zoom.
No.
Although I run all my Zooms off this microphone because everybody says the audio quality is just 10 times better.
Much better, yeah.
And honestly, that makes a difference. It makes my experience with them look better, sound better. So think about that. But here's why I mention it. These days, everybody's inundated with content. You can measure your own junk mail, email, or personal mail, and how many ads we're seeing. I think people are getting saturated with generic content. So there's no question that you need to provide the newsletter, the podcast, the voice. Here's my opinion of the markets.
Yeah.
Here's an event where we're going to put your peers together. We need to do that stuff and we can scale it. But here's the thing that most advisors think they can't do. I can't deliver John Smith's retirement plan to him off cycle because it's going to take my paraplanner 2 hours to run the thing. And it's going to be 40 pages and John's not going to read it anyway. So we're not doing it. That is what we busted at Asset+Map. I can generate an asset map, a target map in 30 seconds. I can tell you whether you're on track for retirement, education, loss of life, long-term care, anything you can think of. I can tell you how much you're on track, what's your funding level, whether we need to step it up or not. 30 seconds, send it out. 30 seconds, send it out. I'm applying my advisor intelligence, personalizing it to that person. Once we get into these challenges where there's a big barrier to execute something of value, we just overthink it or we delegate it and then maybe it happens or it doesn't. What we're really moving towards is this idea is that I can deliver contextual advice to you without you expecting it. Like I'll point out your shoes are untied just because I'm in the business of shoes, right? I see that, I'm going to point it out. You didn't ask me. I pointed out. So whether it's delivering an asset map or our newest thing called Signals, which is an algorithmic financial plan, like boom, 30 seconds. I can tell you whether we're red, green, yellow, bad. Let's start a conversation. So that's what I mean when I think of personalized at scale delivery of financial advice, what we've becoming called advice engagement, getting you engaged around this stuff. Is going to be critical because it's going to differentiate. I'm much more likely to read something that has my name in it, on it. That's my stuff than a generic thing, but don't do nothing.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And that's so important. It's so crucial. Tell us a little bit more about signals. What does that create?
Signals was actually based on, it's funny because all these things have a funny history, but one of the things that I was asked to speak something like 10 years ago at this conference. I had spoken at it several years before. The president calls me and says, Adam, I don't want you talking about Asset+Map. Okay. I want you to talk about something completely different. I'm like, well, that's what I do. That's what I want. All right. And I came up with this thing on the drive there. It was a 4-hour drive. And I wound up calling it the 6 L's. It's basically asking a client in every single meeting, if it's an annual meeting, by the way, what's the plan to deal with the 6 events that are going to completely disrupt all of our good planning?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Adam, what are the 6 events? Liquidity, long-term disability, loss of life, long-term care, longevity, and legal and legacy attacks.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? All of them started with L because that's how I remember things.
Sure.
It's asking the client, what's their plan? Run a fire drill, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
If they, God forbid, had a loss of life scenario right now, do we know what to do? Do we have enough capital? Does everybody know where to look? Does no other documents in order? Do we know who to call? And I'm running through there so we don't basically lose people in the fire well. Okay.
Yeah.
And what's imperative about that is you usually learn what people's either approach to it, plan preparedness is. We took this and we said, gosh, could we turn this into an algorithm where we can give people a red, green, or yellow light for that condition? So we didn't have to ask that silly question, which is actually very powerful, by the way.
Yeah.
If you actually ask yourself that question, or you go to your partner if you have one and ask them, by the way, what's our plan to deal with a long-term care event? I don't know, honey. What's our plan? We don't have a plan.
Yeah.
Let's talk to our advisor. So the key is that it starts to bring up, if I gave you a yellow light for, let's say, longevity, you would know, Stephen, well, Adam, why do I have a yellow light for longevity? Well, basically means you would probably not be able to sustain the current income of your household all the way to age 95 based upon your assets and your future income sources. Wow, Adam, is that something we should look into? Does that bother you? Yes. Let's run a retirement plan. Done. Mm-hmm. So the key here is what Signals has won a lot of awards around is we're really pre-running financial planning in seconds versus taking the months it takes to typically do it. And we're turning it into you're good, bad, or not so good.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's the whole point.
Yeah. And that I really like the concept that you're talking about of proactively reaching out to clients when they aren't expecting it. So much of the time we think that good customer service is giving them what they expect, but that's honestly what everybody does, really. I mean, is the good customer service is going way above and beyond their expectation. I think it was Philip Cotter years ago, is he had the the expected product and the expanded product, or what, I forget how he described it, but in his language, all top performers are out here on the on the fringes of providing things that weren't expected, that were way above and beyond what the norm was.
Totally.
And that's just so important. Nobody's delighted with you. You go into a restaurant, you get exactly the meal you expected. It's not particularly exciting. The service is fine.
You get what you pay for then.
Fine. Yeah. But if you paid $100 and you feel like you had $1,000 experience, that's a whole different thing. You rave and rant about it all over the place. Same with every level of service. It doesn't matter whether it's your doctor, your financial advisor, or your lawyer. And the degree that they reach out and really pay attention is making all the difference in the world. Tell us a little bit about your podcast. What I went on a binge and did 3 or 4 podcasts a day for a couple months, and then I took a break and went through a bunch of yours. But the thing that I like about podcasts as a marketing tool is it really feels like the other person. Once you meet them, you really feel like you have some personality attached, that at least if you do it right. I've had people that I met that I knew about the kids, and I knew about their nicknames, and I knew about their hobbies, and I knew about their interests and their background. And to me, all that stuff is more important than the specific knowledge when it comes to really developing a following and really developing a long-term asset with it.
Well, I think you're bringing up a couple of things. Using the podcast as a business development or a relationship development tool has been really, really effective. I didn't realize that when I started it. And I think you're right, because the classic, if I ask you enough questions about you, you're going to feel connected to me because I care, because
Yeah.
I'm asking you questions and I'm listening, by the way. And I
Yeah.
got to listen in a podcast because I've got to regurgitate it back to you that I actually listened to get to the next thing. So it just makes perfect sense why a casual conversation that's all about you is going to build relationship with us inherently to our humanity.
You
The
bet.
interesting thing about the podcast for me, I started with a different intent. Derek and I, who's my podcast co-host, we actually, believe it or not, we met in COVID. I followed him on a presentation stage and I was like, wow, you're talking about the same thing as me. We hit it off, became buddies. We've become like really like best friends. It's hilarious.
Oh, good.
We only met just 4 or 5 months ago for
Yeah.
the first time in person. But we had built this. We just hit our 50th episode on rethinking financial advice. So we're basically coming at it. We're both of us recovering CFPs, built technology companies to fix problems that we saw in the industry. And we're just literally challenging every single thing that we've always done to confirm that, yes, we're doing it right, or we can do it better. And it's a mentorship podcast, which basically means we're not using it as lead gen. We're using it and we're not monetizing it. We're basically using it as a way to say, hey, what are 3 things that I can learn from this expert? And we've had all kinds of, great people. We've got a huge lineup coming. That's really fun. But that's our thing. And it's been our hobby project that's touched, tens of thousands of people now, which is amazing. So,
Yeah. And I think a lot of people start a podcast with the mistaken assumption that, thousands of people are going to find me randomly by, searching Apple Podcasts or whatever. And, occasionally that happens and, it makes a lot of noise, but that is so rare. Really, I heard it described a different way by, a high level marketing guy I work with, is it's a really good way to nurture the relationship with somebody who's already on your list and already you're communicating with, whether it's a prospect or whether it's a client. And it's a really good way for them to plug in to what you're doing and to be actively engaged with you along the way. Let me see if I can get this to disappear again.
oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're exactly right. That's a great insight. I know a lot of people bail on the podcast because they're not getting the results they want. You got to create content. You got to think in the production standpoint. Like one of the things that we've had to think about is how do we make this podcast not like every other podcast, right?
Sure.
So we actually came in and said, well, what's the kind of podcast we would like? We said, well, we want to learn something. If you interview somebody, don't interview them for 2 hours straight. It's funny because I was just on Michael Kitz's podcast. He had us on there for 1 hour and 40 minutes. I mean, I've never talked so much in my life. And he did 2 more of that day. I don't know how he does it, but at the same time, we found that most of our kind of community has this learned attention deficit disorder. They don't have, in other words, their time is busy. They don't have time to sit through an hour. So, but they can take on snippets. So what we did is we said, all right, we're going to do 7 to 15 minute interviews. And then we're going to debate what they said. And then we're going to come up with 3 conclusions. And then we're going to do a community question that was asked to us from our LinkedIn. And we're going to answer that live. And it, I don't know, wound up sticking. And that's pretty much the format for all of our podcasts today. We force everybody to answer the same 4 questions, and then we debate whether they know what they're talking about.
Yeah. Well, and that's very similar to what the original video magazine format was. Most of the popular TV shows that people watch are, at the very least in 7-minute segments or 15 at the outside. It is interesting in the media world right now. It seems like there's 2 contradictory trends going on at the same time. There's super short form, so 45-second to 2 or 3 minute shorts, and there's super long form, hour 45 minutes. Joe Rogan podcast. Paul Bet-Davis. I was just listening to one he did. It was 4.5 hours.
Wow.
Right. So there's both of those at once, and you can't discount any of the 3. There are people who will be really engaged in the topic and will be there long term. Most people are being trained to watch a 60-second video and not to do much else. Then there's the intermediate range in between. One of the marketing principles, and this goes back 100 years, is in any sales situation, is a little different than a podcast, but is to make the complete sale, right? So if it's a letter, if it has to be a 20-page letter, make it a 20-page letter. If it can be a 2-page letter, make it a 2-page letter. Make the complete sale, but then give alternate ways of consuming it. So, some people will read the headline, they'll read the PS, and they'll read the offer. Some people will read the bullet points.
Yeah.
Some people will read the paragraph headers. Others will read the whole thing. People who aren't interested in the topic will pay attention to none of it. And in all these different media, I think it's important to address each of those different consumption patterns, and figure out what's going to work best for prospective clients, as well as for your current clients.
No, it's well said. Yeah, I agree with you. And then there's from the modalities of from visual, auditory to kinesthetic to our association affiliation of persona. Who do we want to be like? What are our values? There's obviously an awareness. Most financial advisors, unfortunately, haven't been trained on this, right? We just said, okay, I've got a list of people I got to make phone calls and try to close business in my early days. Hopefully you get to a place where you've created a little bit of a flywheel. And then you find yourself getting out of business development and more into technical sales, and confidence building. And then you forget actually how to do any marketing whatsoever because business is coming into you or you got organic growth. I think there's so much opportunity for advisors to learn what's going on. We have several advisors that are using social media, Facebook. They're creating user groups and just delivering lots of advice. I know one guy's got 200 inbound households a month coming from Facebook, just because he's delivering value and content for free, and he's cherry picking it, and he's just deciding who he wants to work with or not. And he's, he'll break 100 billion of AUM in the year, just doing that. And there are some other things that financial advisors really could contemplate, bring obviously the next generation in, because they're going to think about these things. They're going to know how to connect with them. Consultants like yourself that are doing great work. It's really important that you challenge the status quo so that you can be informed about what am I intentionally making a decision on.
Yeah. And another way I've heard it said, and I've got the facade of Wall Street back here, but I use it mostly to illustrate the principle of having a marketing Parthenon. Don't have one or two methods for driving new people into your practice. Have 20, have 30 different things going on. Yeah. And what happens from a standpoint of building awareness and trust is the more different places that somebody sees you and the more different contexts that they see you, the more likely they are to respond and the deeper the trust is going to be once they come into the pipeline. But secondarily, once you get somebody who raises their hand, the more ways you're communicating with them on an outbound method, the better. So if I'm just saturating it with email, we know the average person gets probably 200 emails a day. They get 4 pieces of direct mail a day. But if you're in there, you're suddenly showing up for them in LinkedIn, you're showing up in direct messages, you're showing up in retargeting them on Facebook, you're showing up in their mailbox. And, I have played prospect for, I don't know, probably hundreds of advisors, and exactly one of them has impressed me with their follow-up. It's really amazing. Like, I use Fisher Investments as a really good example of front end marketing. Oh yeah, but their back end is horrible. It's really fascinating. There's a guy here in town. I don't know him. They're not a client of mine, but it's Townsend is the name of the firm. And at least every other week, I'm getting an invitation to an event. I'm getting a follow-up newsletter. I'm getting the newsletter has conversations about their employee party and their customer appreciation and one thing or another. So every time I turn around, once I expressed interest, they're showing up in front of me in multiple different places, online and offline. Yeah. And most advisors don't do that. I don't know how many times I've talked to people who think they're really good at follow-up, and what they'll say is, well, I really follow up a lot for the first week, or I really follow up a lot for the first 30 days. I had one tell me, well, I go and connect with them on LinkedIn, but then if they haven't responded to me in 30 days, I drop them. I did a conversation.
No nurturing, you're saying?
Yeah, I did a conversation with my clients. So we had a group session. It was on Zoom. And I said to them, how long have you guys followed me before you ever became a client? Well, one of them said 9 years. Another one said 7 years. Another one said 5 years. Another one said 3 years. And, admittedly, there were one or two that saw something I did and jumped right in. But that's the exception, not the rule. It's that lead nurture and client nurture that makes the difference. And as you said, some some advisors are comfortable with their lifestyle business, but with a few simple tweaks, they could 10 times or 5 times the results they're getting with very little additional effort.
It's true. I don't think, and we actually cover this on our podcast a couple times, talking about marketing, digital marketing, the tools, and most advisors don't even know what's SEO mean. Like,
Yeah,
what do I do with that? Does that mean I'm going to be putting a posting on LinkedIn every week? Is that really going to matter? The funny thing about being famous and achieving fame is that sometimes people create a persona for you. They decide, oh wow, that person's like famous, powerful, whatever, and it's an artifact. They're just making it up in their brain,
you bet.
based upon the collective brand that they've experienced over time. Now the question is, are you being proactive or intentional about the brand that you're creating in the space that people are perceiving you, or not? If you're not, you don't exist. You're not top of mind. You can't be. If you are creating a brand and you're in the kind of media or social media or whatever in the world that people are bumping into, you start elevating your top of mind awareness. And so when they have problems, when they have challenges, they remember you before they remember to go just Google it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's the real key for financial advice is creating a level of subject matter expertise, what we call SMEs, or thought leadership that can be so easily distributed these days in social media and or podcasting and or YouTubing, whatever you want to do something, pick a channel and basically just tell everybody who you're about. And that authenticity really does well today because people want to connect and they want to relate to you. But in the absence of any of that stuff, you just don't exist. And now they're relying on, I don't know, like your website to decide whether you're credible or not.
Yeah. Well, and most advisors' website is so generic. It's
some sailboat or something like a beach or a boat. Maybe.
Yeah. That's what I don't know. I think I mailed it to you. Did you get a copy of my book?
I did get that. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. I'd love to have feedback on it of any sort. But one of the first things that it seems to me is most advisors, and I freely admit I stole this from the 4-Hour Workweek, Tim Ferriss. He had this picture of the bald fat guy, the old bald fat guy in the red BMW, and that was part of their. I thought a third of the book was brilliant, 2/3 of the book was silly, but the third that was brilliant was really worthwhile. But I've come to think of most advisors as being the guy behind the oak desk in the J.C. Penney suit, that looks like every other advisor. A marketing coach that I work with, he's become a friend over the years, is Dan Kennedy. And when we talked about this niche to begin with, he used a reference. I didn't understand what it was. It was the theme song from Weeds. If you go look at the lyrics from Weeds, it's little houses all alike. Everybody goes to college. It comes out, buys little houses, ticky-tacky. But it's basically what it's saying is everybody looks alike. Everybody's acting alike. Everybody's doing the same thing. And you build no top of mind awareness if you and 500 other people are exactly the same, talking about exactly the same things, look exactly the same, dress exactly alike, present yourself exactly alike. It's just those differentiators of, people are going to trust you when you're talking about your family. They're going to trust you when you're talking about or not. They may be repelled by who you are, but the ones that you want to work with, the ones that you're a good fit with, are going to be attracted to you based upon who you are and based upon that authenticity you're talking about.
Yeah, it's true. I have a t-shirt that I made. So I got into this habit of making like statements and phrases on statement. It says, memorable is better than better.
Yes. I love it.
And because we're all seeking to be the best or better or right. That's how we grew up in a grade point system. But it turns out if you think about actually the most memorable people, like who would you actually remember from your high school even? Gesho?
Yeah.
There's probably something unique about them that made them memorable. Even to this day, they were a star athlete. They were just quirky. They were great on stage. They just had all the friends. We forget that we are wired to basically shortcut in our brain an answer to a problem. So that when we have a problem, we think of our things. Like if I said, okay, I need a plumber, you probably have somebody. You have somebody you trust, you've used them before. You may not have seen them in 10 years, but for some reason you still trust them because you use them, you had a good experience, and you would probably refer if I asked them to. And probably the opposite. You probably have somebody you'd be like, don't ever call those guys. Okay. Right. But the point is that memorable is more important than being better, because memorable is immeasurable. Okay. Whereas better is measurable.
I wrote that down. I'm
Great.
permission to steal that.
Permission to use. There you go. I signed it over.
I always give credit where credit is
All right,
due.
cool. Thanks.
That one is great. I love that. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. In the book there, I used I keep forgetting his name. Who was the lawyer? He's on the OJ trial. He was always wearing like a suede jacket with tassels. Yeah. But
oh, it'll come to me. See, obviously, I know he's memorable because I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, there he is. Yeah, Jerry Spence.
That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, but
we remember. Why remembered that? Why do we remember?
Yeah, there's a picture of Dan Kennedy sitting on a longhorn bull of some sort.
Okay, cool.
But yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. It's much better to be quirky, to have memorable hobbies. And like you said, you think back to who you remember in high school. I remember the kid who had his pilot's license, and the one who had a shortwave radio in his car that he could make phone calls with. Of course, this is long pre-cell phones, and you could go through the list, and everybody, the people who are just kind of generic, normal everyday students.
Like you said, tic-tac.
Lost the sand.
Yeah. Well, it depends. Look, maybe you don't care about that, but if you're in a sales business, an entrepreneurial culture, a leadership place, you got to figure out a way to stand out, be memorable, or, at least with the community that you care about. Not for everybody. You don't have to be a famous person, but be impactful and memorable in the community you want to be in, whether that's a niche or whether that's a community of charity or church or whatever it might be. It just makes all the sense in the world to really just double down on your persona, your personal persona and brand, because it's really all tied to authenticity. But you got to be yourself, because people will smell that a mile away these days. They just don't have time for nonsense.
Oh, absolutely.
Figure out a way.
Hey, and I want to be respectful of your time here.
Yeah.
What would you like to share with people that we haven't touched on?
That we've shared everything there is.
Yeah, there you go.
Look, I think that if you're a financial professional, legal, tax, insurance, investment, and you haven't used Asset+Map, you got to check it out. So I would recommend anybody just see what it's all about, because we're really trying to change the entire planet the way we were born. Yellow pad, digitized, right? The way we connect and communicate. Let's get back to those roots and connect and engage. Also, check out our podcast, Rethink Financial Advice. Is really fun. So I appreciate you, Stephen, and all you're doing. Your book is awesome. And thank you for supporting our industry.
Oh, you're very welcome. And I've had a great time.
Fantastic. Me too.
Let me see if I can get us to stop recording now.